Thanks for stopping by Big Top Gaming. My name's Brian, and in this video we're going over round 2 of the Minnesota tournament report that I had played in at the Battleground Cafe in, I think it's White Bear something, Minnesota. I can't remember the name of the city that they're actually in. All I know is that it's really nice that it's right off the interstate, so I just have to exit, and then I'm basically right there. My opponent for this round was Trevor of the Minnesota meta, and they presented me with a Retribution pairing, and I did get paired up in this game, or paired down, whatever it was. I was punching up because Trevor won their last round. And I decided, of course, to drop Bennett. The two lists my opponent presented were Assyria with some battle engines and a bunch of the new medium-based Retribution stuff. And then the other list was Gorshade 4 with some Risavas and a bunch of other small-based infantry. So I didn't feel like Lucas was going to be the one to go into that pairing so much because Assyria does have Arcane Vortex and makes that a little bit more on the tough side. And given the scenario that we were playing, I didn't feel like, it was the best thing for Lucas to be doing. He has some nice throwaway pieces and can kind of mess around with the table a little bit, but on Spread the Net you have a lot of different elements to kind of take into consideration. And with Assyria having as large of a control area as she does, she can kind of stay in the very back and affect everything that she needs to from the safety of halfway across the table. So for the Gorshade matchup, I also didn't feel like Lucas was going to be the one to go for. I only have one way to ignore the clouds, but I thought that if my opponent dropped Gorshade, it would be not terrible for me because Bennett has the ability to wipe clouds, and the Rocketmen seem like they wouldn't be too bad at trying to punk the melee threats because they could just move up, shoot, and then move back with that 5-inch repo, and then with downrange, they should be able to cut the armor pretty decently. But So the matchup ended up being, of course, Bennett into Assyria. So since I'm in Magnus Opus, it was likely for me to win the turn to go first, which I did, and my opponent ended up sticking me on the side with the Fire Cloud, even though it wasn't a big deal for me because most of my stuff flies and isn't affected by it. Same thing with the Quicksand side. There was a nice little area for Assyria to kind of hang out behind, and very little of his army, well, the parts that he was putting in those spots was not affected by the Quicksand either. I think for the objective, I might have taken like concealment or something like that. I can't remember. It wasn't super relevant to me for this game. But you can kind of see how I've positioned everything. I've got one unit of Rocketmen flying out towards the Reds box zone on my opponent's side of the table. They're going to be playing pretty aggressive, while the middle unit's going to kind of be hanging back a little bit to try and stay safe from those tridents and try and score that center zone, or at least jam it out to where it's very unlikely that my opponent's going to be scoring it, and there might be a chance that I could push forward further and make sure that they couldn't get into that zone. And then the suppressor's hanging out by the Fire Cloud. I'm pretty sure I want to give him Arcane Propulsion first turn so I can just fly him over it and get him to where he wants to be. And then my Vindicator is by my blue zone because I wanted to make sure that I could get something in that zone that could still affect the table, because Bennett's so mobile that she basically has the ability to fly around the table wherever she wants to, and definitely takes advantage of that. But that Vindicator can just kind of sit and aim and then charge any kind of big things that come in with having that extra threat from Arcane Propulsion. And then you can see that my opponent's deployment was pretty mirrored. There's the two executioners, I believe they are, on both sides, and then I believe the small-based model is Scythe. Then two tridents, and then towards the middle we've got Hemera by the red trident, and then a unit of wardens in the middle with Assyria, and then I believe the Manicore and the Harpy. I believe it's the Harpy. I'm pretty sure it is. It's the small based one that has like a Thunderbolt gun, or just medium based. It's the light Warjack no, not Vector. Why can't I? It's Myrmidon. Are the lights called Myrmidons? I don't know. But at any rate, those are hanging over next to the Black Trident with Alara, and there's probably I think there's a Soulless Escort in that Warden unit too. So that's where we're sitting at for the deployment for turn 1. So now I've got the camera up and running, so I was able to start recording, which means I missed the picture for the movement for turn 1, but you can kind of see what's going on here. I've got that unit on the far side with occultation on them, hoping that can keep them pretty safe, and the suppressor did not get arcane propulsion. I decided to put that on the Vindicator, who kind of ran up towards the zone to stay out of threat of the Tridents, and is accompanied by his little Stinger buddy, and that made sure that I could keep them safe. I did kind of dangle a Trancer out there in the front because I'm not too worried about giving them up right now. The back unit of Rocketmen ended up getting the defensive order, so they're sitting pretty decent, and I just wanted to try and make it difficult for my opponent to do what they wanted to do with the Tridents this turn, and try and make sure that as little went away from me as possible. So we had a small discussion with the tournament organizer right at the beginning of this turn. Both myself and my opponent, for whatever reason, could not remember the interactions between True Sight and Arc Nodes, and we just had to confirm that because that Arc Node can definitely get into the the Arc Node could not get into the Rocketmen that have occultation on them because of the Arc Node is the one that needed the Eyeless Sight, but now my opponent's doing some shenanigans with the Tridents to get Chimera to move up and try and put him in range of getting into those Rocketmen on turn 1 with a pretty nasty spell. So this is where my opponent's trying to figure out how they need to move in order to get up there. And they end up running Chimera the full way up to get within 5 inches of my Rocketmen. And if I were paying more attention to this, I probably could have scooted them back just a little bit more because I don't think they were in by much. There's no reason why I needed to play this far forward with how much speed I've got. But now you can see Assyria's coming up, and for those of you who are seasoned Retribution players or people who play against them often, I completely forgot that Blinding Light was a model unit spell, and it's not good on Rocketmen, so they can't do basically anything. Normally you would be fine being able to make your melee attacks and all that stuff, but the melee attack for the Rocketmen is actually a shooting attack from their gun, so by getting Blinding Light on both of those units, that essentially shuts down any kind of offensive output that I could have had from them for this next coming turn, which is really not good for me because it means that my ability to utilize my extreme threat ranges and ways to pump up damage isn't really going to do much. So maybe in hindsight was Bennett the right call for this matchup? There's a good chance she wasn't because Blinding Light really hurts her, and I don't think it would hurt Lucas so much. But that's a story for later, I think. At any rate, I happen to find myself in a pretty decent position. Well, not decent position, an interesting position. These are the kind of games that I do like to get into quite a bit because I feel like when you're playing games that you're just going to smoke someone in, you don't get the chance to really learn much. It almost feels like you're going through the motions. And with this, it means that I'm able to find myself, I happen to find myself in a really not great position, and I need to try and figure out how to play out of it. So I think at this point, Trevor's just taking the time to do some fancy positioning. He really doesn't need to worry too much about the threat ranges on my Rocketmen anymore because they literally will do nothing. So they're just kind of playing, to get into the zones. They don't need to be extremely active on trying to get there. So they're not giving me any pieces and trying to respect the threat range of the Vindicator, both for melee and shooting. But the covering fire template from the Mana Core comes down in order to try and stop the Stinger from going up and doing a bunch of work, which is not great for me because even though they have the immunity to blast damage baked into them and Def 16, they're still susceptible to that covering fire. So that's something that I need to also not deal with. So we get to the end of this turn, and now we're going to be rolling into mine right away, so there's no like fun transitions or anything. This is just kind of I really just recorded congruently and then stopped it when I needed to, so the camera didn't fuzz out. So I have to think real hard about what I need to do here, and I think what is going to happen for me, or what I'm going through in my head when I'm sitting here, at the table with this problem, is I I think that since Blinding Light has kind of really got me, the best thing that I can do for myself right now is just use my Rocketmen as jamming pieces. My opponent did take a extremely long turn one to get to where they were at. So I'm starting to think that I'm going to utilize a clock advantage that I might have on my opponent. So right now it's a pretty minimal clock advantage, but one nonetheless. I end up activating the unit of Rocketmen that had Occultation but is now dropped because there's no need for it. And they just kind of run up to be really annoying in certain places. They're just, getting up in my opponent's grill to where when they come in, they don't have a whole lot of great options in terms of being able to, take those pieces off. I think there might have been some benefit to maybe not jamming as hard as I did and then just using their defensive order to make them a little more difficult to hit, especially with Blinding Light on the table, kind of mitigating their defense a little bit. So I'm using some of the solos in the back. They're kind of positioned behind all of the Rocketmen. I've got a Stinger and an Ace over there, the single Ace that's in the list. I have a Trancer on my flag, so I can start scoring that pretty well. And now this is like where I get to kind of beat myself up a little bit. I had upkept Arcane Propulsion on the Vindicator, but I didn't need it to get to Chimera, so I really should have not upkept that and just thought about what I needed to do with the Vindicator first. So Bennett ends up going over and putting Arcane Propulsion on the Suppressor to get him in the game a little bit quicker, and then she repositions behind the forest to try and stay a little bit further away from the bottom side of the table where I don't have a whole lot of presence, and this just makes it so that my opponent is going to have a hard time fishing her out. So it's kind of one of the neat things about watching Bennett play is that she really can just get from the table side to table side with very little effort. So the Suppressor over here walks up, and the reason why I had to put Arcane Propulsion on him is so I could rust Chimera, because that's the only way I could get him within range. So I end up hitting, and then I try to go for an Ice Cage that's unboosted, and I don't connect with that one, but I've at least got rust on there, and that's the real important one. So we have the Vindicator charge up and start swinging, and he hits pretty easily. He still needs decent, I think it's like a 7 to hit Chimera or something like that, but he hits every attack he takes and does quite a bit of damage to him. He doesn't box Chimera in the one charge, but he definitely does a ton of work. So now I feel like I've I was checking for the charge lane on the Trancer and trying to get the Trancer to finish that up. So the Trancer slams Chimera back and does enough damage to pull him off the table. So the Trancer then repos forward just to be kind of more of a jamming piece as well. Next up, the other unit of Rocketmen are, these ones are the ones doing the defensive order, so this is the unit that I'm doing the smart stuff with. And then the Ascendant Mentalist walks up and puts in Force Barrier. The nice thing about those is being able to just kind of you can walk through them with the abilities that are sitting around the table. And then my Stinger runs off to the side just to kind of exist and be happy over there. So I don't know if my opponent was... There were a couple things that they had pointed out to me that they were definitely surprised by. First was the speed that the list had and being able to kind of cram him out of that zone pretty early. And I do apologize for the ever-changing camera angles on this one. Based on the table that we were playing on, it was a little too awkward to try and line up the shot, so I didn't have a level on this tripod, so this is just kind of the world I'm living in. I definitely have some takeaways for how I want to do these in the future. So, they'll improve at least, and you won't get vertigo by watching these games. But anyways, the other thing that they were shocked by a bit was that I decided to unpack my Vindicator to get into Chimera. But honestly, Chimera is a real big problem for the list here. Not only does Chimera have some pretty decent abilities and give Assyria a little bit of focus efficiency, but just having that arc node on the table, able to do whatever it wants without Assyria getting up in the business, is something that I don't particularly appreciate. And the Vindicator, although he is extremely offensive and just a really good piece, like on the side, I think he's definitely in top 3 Warjacks in the game. But I do feel like the trade was appropriate, but I do understand the perspective that, with Blinding Light being out on all these Rocketmen, that by losing pieces that by losing pieces that are like they make my opponent's decisions a little bit easier. So like if he's blinding lighting both of my Rocketmen units, then the Vindicator stands to be one of the pieces that does work or is allowed to do work. So now what I've done is I've made it so that my opponent can keep blinding light on both of my Rocketmen units and then take out the Vindicator so they don't have to worry about it doing stuff. So I think what's going on here is Assyria is feated. She got Blinding Light on the unit that's jammed up a little bit, but she went for a Blinding Light unboosted on the unit that did the defensive order, and that one did not connect. So I'm pretty stoked that I have one unit of Rocketmen that can actually do things right now, and that's feeling pretty good for me. So I've decided to skip around in this clip a little bit, mostly because I can't seem to pump the speed up as much as I want to. My computer seems to get a little chunky with the feedback on this one, so I gotta do what I gotta do. And this turn is proving to be a quite long one for my opponent. You can see that a lot of the Rocketmen have already kind of fallen out from various attacks from Tridents and stuff like that. And then the Mana Core came in and left the Vindicator on only one box, which is nice. It means that my opponent needs to use other pieces to try and get that Vindicator out. I did, however, forget that Arcane Propulsion gave you +2 defense as well, so that that defense of 11 went up to 13, which is a little bit more on the dicey side to hit, but I think under Assyria's feet, I'm pretty sure my opponent connected with all of it. So we have the Wardens coming in, and they end up taking out the Vindicator pretty easily, and then they're going through and just doing some work on the Rocketmen, and I'm not quite sure what I had to measure there. I think it might have been this was my opponent cleaved into the Trancer, and the Trancer ended up blowing up on one of the Wardens, maybe two of them, and did just a little bit of damage, nothing big. So they're still hanging around hardy and healthy. So now they're going off on a cleaving spree and sidestep cleave spree on some of these Rocketmen that are hanging out in the top zone. So this is kind of the thing I was aiming for. I knew that these Wardens would be able to hit them and kill them easy peasy, but my opponent has to do something with them or else the game kind of stales out a little bit. And they ended up using a significant amount of time on their clock to do a lot of these things, because you've got the dice math with Assyria of dropping your lowest and then going through and figuring out the side steps in the cleave. It's just a lot of stuff to do in a turn. And then you've got like the places from the Tridents. There's just on my opponent's side, there's a lot of bookkeeping and lots of little checks and balances, so to speak, for abilities. And by playing this the way that I have, or at least trying to utilize the pieces that I have the way that I am, I think that I'm kind of executing my goal pretty well here. So the Trident goes up and rolls a bunch of shots. I think it was like 3 for every single side. So my opponent could not shoot into the Stinger. They had to pick. It was either shoot the Rocketmen or shoot the Stinger. And maybe it wasn't a whole lot of shots on this one, but they ended up not hitting a single thing on the Rocketmen, and I, of course, didn't dodge them because I wasn't paying attention to my rules so much. Like I said, there's so much in this list that has so many rules, it's hard to keep track of it. So now we've got this other Trident coming up on the top, and I think the Trident's goal over here is to try and get some more of the Rocketmen gone, but also trying to hunt some of those solos down that are hanging out in back. I think the Rocketman ace is just a little bit on the scary side, but the Stinger is definitely a problem for Tridents. So I think that's what's going on over here. And this might have been the battle engine that rolled up a ton of shots, and they were trying to get into the Trancer that was behind the forest, and there was a line there to do it. So unfortunately, the Trident ended up connecting and ripping that one off, but no one was around to take any damage from it. And then we're going through and just popping off Rocketmen solos. Or just Rocketmen units. I don't think we're touching the solos yet. I think there was a miss on the Rocketman ace at least, which I did remember dodge for that one, so I was able to kick it back a little further back, or kick it further backwards, and try and be a little bit more on the safe side. So it looks like there actually wasn't a whole lot of work that came out from that top Trident. For whatever reason, I thought there was a ton of stuff going on up here. I believe also Scythe is trying to do things, but with her position and all of my rocket people having neg 3 range to be hit, or to be shot at, that's kind of making her a little bit on the ineffectual side. So now we're rolling into my turn 3. Yeah, I think it's my turn 3. So top of 3. I've got a lot of things that I can do now because I do have a unit of rocketmen that's mostly intact. There's a few missing here and there, but I'm able to start to do work with them, which is great. And I think that I'm kind of planning out like how I want to execute Bennett's activation, because I think this is going to be a feat turn, and I think the feat models are going to be the ones that I'm going to try and utilize in the middle to try and get rid of some of the things that that my opponents kind of put there. Maybe get rid of some of these big pieces and try and leverage some of that attrition on my side, because the thing for me is right now, like if I lose Rocketmen, it's not a big deal. Like that's what they're not there to be lost. They're still expensive models. They do work for sure with everything Bennett has to offer, but I definitely want to make sure that they get some work done right now, but I'm not crying over losing a couple of them. So Bennett decides to go charging the Mana Core in the middle, and this is mostly just so I can get a good place to apply my feat. And she hits and doesn't do a whole lot of damage here. I think I might have both barreled. No, I don't think I both barreled, but I really should have, because I didn't want to. I don't need to spend extra focus on buying attacks. So we do a little bit of damage here and there, maybe a point or two on the trident as well. So I feat, and I believe I put downrange on the unit of rocketmen that hasn't been blinding lighted this turn, and then the rest of them come up, and I put up the raid spell as well. So anything that starts its charge in my control area gets Pistolier and +2 to their movement, which kind of makes it so that the rocketmen are like kind of weapon masters almost. So I'm trying to fit some of this other unit in to go, or some of the feated unit into some of my opponent's wardens, and then the rest of them are kind of going into the Mana Core. So these ones, I don't think I put downrange on them. Yeah, I don't think so, at least. I think downrange is for sure on the back unit of Rocketmen. So I'm just doing some math here on some of these guys, figuring out how many dice I need to throw, because we've got Pistolier, and on some of these slug guns we've got Jack Hunter, but I guess the slug guns don't matter so much right now because I'm looking at just the feated unit. So they go in and start doing some work. I don't think I do what someone would consider a significant amount of damage. Trying to hit some of these wardens is a little bit more on the tough side with them having set defense. But the thing is I've really just kind of done what I wanted to do and jam them up with more rocketmen that they've got to go ahead and take care of. So now I get to go do some fun stuff. My Stinger has parry, so he flies right over. I punch the trident twice to both Shadowbind and blind it. So I think that was when my opponent realized what Stingers did, and was just like, this is the most ridiculous solo I've ever seen. And I'm like, yep, it's pretty dang good. So if you are a Crucible Guard player and having issues with battle engines, this Stinger is your one to go for. Especially Retribution, because these models do not like having both those effects applied to them. So I think now I'm just using some of the remnants of the Rocketmen unit on the top side of the screen to just kind of jam up a little bit more. And then we put in the Suppressor, who honestly probably could have gone before Bennett just to apply Rust. I am shooting into her, but it doesn't matter because Rust and Ice Cage is all I'm really looking for. So if I get those, then it's not a big deal. So I end up getting, I think, the Rust Shot to apply, but I don't think I do the Ice Cage or hit the Ice Cage. So now I've got the Rocket Lady solo in, and this is where I definitely cheated a bit. Not that I think it matters a ton. I was double counting brutal damage and I was counting Dogfighter, and I can't remember. It was Pistolier is a boosted damage roll, and then there was another rule on her card that boosted. I can't remember if it was Dogfighter that boosted or brutal damage that did an additional die. I think that's the way it works, but I ended up rolling 5 dice for damage and doing a ton of work to to that trident. So I do apologize for the misunderstanding on the rules. There was just a lot going on there, and this was like literally the first charge I'd ever made with a Rocket Girl solo, or Rocket Person solo, or Rocket Man Ace. Jeepers Creepers, Brian. So the reason why I don't think that matters so much is because now we've got the downrange unit going in, and I've got a lot of the I have a couple slug guns kind of packed into the mana core, and the rest of them are going into the trident because it had taken a significant amount of damage. And then I've got one that's going into this executioner on the bottom of the screen. Not that I think I'm going to be doing a ton of damage to it, but I at least want to jam it up a little bit. But with the first like one attack that I do with a Rocket Man that came into it, I do remove it. So I had a couple more attacks left from those other Rocket Men that I could have used. So even losing the one die off of the Rocket Man Ace wouldn't have really done a whole lot, or wouldn't have changed the outcome, I guess, just losing that one die. So I think that passes my turn, and I'm feeling pretty good about where I'm sitting right now. My opponent's clock is real down low, and he's running out of options here. So coming up into the bottom of 3, my opponent is definitely shocked by the amount of work I was able to get done with all these rocket folk. I think it's one of those things where if you're not, if you've never played against Bennett, it's really difficult to understand how much she can turn these rocket solos or these Rocket Man up. She just has so many different layers of buffs that she can get going on them that the Rocket Men can really just wipe things like crazy off the table, especially the Rocket Man Aces. Having Dogfighter, there are quite a few models in the game right now that fly. I'm looking at you, Archons, and when she gets into them, she does a ton of work. And Assyria especially had to be quite scared of them because she also flies, or at least I'm pretty sure she flies. I don't think she has Pathfinder. I think she's a flyer. So getting one of those Rocket Man Aces into Assyria was a danger. Was like a dangerous prospect. So one of the things that is unfortunate for my setup right now is that Bennett is currently camping nothing, and I'm really banking on her defensive stats to save her through this one. Assyria's feat's kind of come and gone, so I don't have to worry about balancing any of that anymore. Or not balancing it, but worrying about it. So everything my opponent does needs to be, without that feat. However, without my opponent having a battle group for Assyria, it also means that he's not putting any focus on anything else. So Assyria is able to sit with quite a bit of juice over there. So my opponent, even though they're extremely low on clock, decides to start taking attacks on Rocket Men with the Wardens, and that's just going to clear out a little bit of space. And then Assyria comes up, and she gets within blinding light range because that's the only thing that she really wants to get on Bennett. So she ends up, Assyria ends up connecting with it, and I think she's sitting on nothing right now based on a couple. I think she put up like Crusader's Call or something like that, and tucked out behind the wall that happens to be in some quicksand over there. So we're looking at the Mentalist because I ended up putting the -2, I think it's Psychokinetic Barrier, so no charges, no slams, no power attacks within 5, and then your -2 Mat and -2 Rat for enemy models that are in there. I believe now it's the Harpy that's come up, and maybe aimed even. I can't remember if it moved or not. And takes a couple shots and flatlines Bennett. So some of the things that I could have done differently, at least on this turn, was recognize that there was an out for my opponent by getting into Bennett. So one of the options that I had that I did not take advantage of was I had the ability to reposition Bennett by 5 inches, and I think that had I done that, I would have taken a free strike for sure, but it might not have been enough to get me, plus the mana core would still have to hit pretty well in order to connect with her, and I could have just hung out behind the suppressor and been maybe just a little bit more safe from shooting. That is one of the downfalls of Bennett in this list, is that she is a medium-based warcaster and has not a whole lot to hide behind. But another thing, too, would be me recognizing that the shooting the ranged assassination was the option that my opponent was going to go for, and I could have put up force barrier instead of psychokinetic barrier, and that would have given Bennett just a little bit more oomph to kind of take some of those shots. I don't know based on dice if it was enough to if the +2 would be enough for her to survive it, but I do think that overall this game was really a good experience for me. I don't know if like the Lucas game would have worked out better. Like Blinding Light sure is a pain in the butt, and maybe I could have played around it just a little bit better to make sure that my Rocket Men could do something on turn 2. But I definitely appreciated the ability to get myself put into a not good situation and kind of fight out of it. I definitely think my opponent ended with maybe 7 minutes on their clock. So had I given just a little bit more interest in keeping Bennett alive and not in the middle of the table, I probably would have been able to get there on just clock maybe, because the scenario is pretty even. You can see he's got 2 points and I've got 1, and that's not really changing a whole lot anytime soon. So that's the end of round 2 for this tournament. So I'm going into round 3 0-2, but so far my games have been pretty good in terms of like showing like even though I'm 0-2, it doesn't really say much in terms of my performance really. Like of course I've lost, and that's definitely showing that my performance isn't super great, but every single game that I played, I ended up doing pretty well with the situation that was afforded me, and I think that's I'm pretty stoked about getting into this round 3 to see how things go.